Hey Patterson, how are you today?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
I'm well. I'm looking after a friend's house. Well, actually, technically, I'm looking after their dog, and I get the house with it. So I've got the weekend kind of looking after someone's dog. So looking nice change of place for me.
So you're saying you're in the doghouse?
No, no, I'm in the house. The
Oh,
dog's outside, but it is the dog's house, not mine.
okay.
Yes, I'm with you.
Uh, well, that's I think where we left off last week was a good segue into what I like to talk about is the one of the primary causes of this chronic degenerative disease burden in our society that's affecting 14 out of 15 people's cause of death, which is food poisoning, but directly related to uh, weight gain. So, so
Hang on, let me just pull that apart. So 14 out of 15 people, you're talking line up 10 people that nearly are all doing this.
yeah.
It's a form of food poisoning, is the way I said it, because they're eating whatever they're eating. And so the way I look at that is there's a couple of things. So first of all, poisoning myself potentially. So is the poison killing me, or is that causing me to be obese and then that's killing me? Or is it all of that?
Well, it's a little bit of all that. I mean, people think obesity is a train out of control, but in fact, it's very much in control, and it's in control at your supermarket by the foods that are cheap to buy and the foods that are cheap to produce. And those foods are well engineered to get to your addictive centers and sharpen your taste buds for them in a manner that you just can't say no. Sugar, salt, and fat, additives, taste enhancers, flavor enhancers, all these things are designed to get you to go to the checkout counter and pay. Now, as a result, when you and I were kids in high school or wherever, there were no people that were really obese in our class. There were maybe one or two in the school that had a little bit of a weight problem. I don't know. Was that your remembrance?
Yeah, absolutely. There was only ever one or two fat kids, and that was it. And they were fat, not obese. There's a big
Yeah.
difference there.
Yeah,
Being someone that's a little bit overweight versus, hang on, they've got a big problem here.
exactly right. And right now, what happens is that as we live in this quote toxic food environment for the last 50 years, where ultra processed foods have become more and more and more available, and whole food has become less and less and less available. The difference is that we need more food to fill us up, and that relates to more calories on a daily basis. It might surprise you that we need about anywhere from 1,800 to 2,500 calories at most a day for us. That's if you're 45 kilos, or if you're 100 kilos, so there's somewhere in that range. You don't need that many calories, 2,500 calories. But the average intake for the average person on the street is greater than 3,500 calories.
Whoa.
Yeah, so all of a sudden there's this discrepancy between what the body actually needs to replenish itself on a daily basis and what's it going to do with the extra calories. Well, I think it's obvious that the extra calories get stored, and they get stored in a what I call a surreptitious manner, and that they're more efficiently stored when we're in this hypercaloric state. So when we get too many calories, the body's really got its, let's store this into intra-abdominal body fat. Let's store this in the liver. Let's store this in the muscle mode. And that's the fat. It's taking sugar and turning it into fat. It's taking fat and storing it immediately. It's taking excess protein and turning it into fat or sugar and storing it. So everything's going into storage first. Then you have to pull it back out only when you're hurting and you need the energy. because it's not there immediately anymore, as it would be in a time-released mechanism, like with some brown rice or some broccoli or some cashew nuts. It's not being slowly distributed without spiking your blood sugar into this zone. So what is actually going on is that we don't have the metabolic mechanisms to burn energy efficiently anymore. And therefore, we have this obesitis. And in other words, it's actually an inflammation of our bodies created by the ripping and tearing fat within our tissues. And that inflammation,
So that's kind of, yeah.
and
Mm.
that
So the
inflammation,
fat causes one thing, as in it puts a strain on the body, but ultimately it causes inflammation inside the body, which then has a cascade to other things.
inside your arteries, inside your organs, inside your glands, inside your connective tissues. Everything is a heightened level of inflammation, and that is the beginning of those chronic degenerative diseases. So, what are people to do about this? First off, what is it when we eat something normal, as we have the last million years? We had to tear it apart with our teeth. We had to chew it. We had to swallow it. And we had to slowly extract the sugar out of it. If we were lucky enough to find some, a raspberry bush full of raspberries and blackberry bush and some fresh fruit hanging, and we stuffed it in our face, our blood sugar immediately went up, and we stored a little bit of it because we knew that the next season was coming when it wasn't going to be that plentiful. And so that was a cue. So we knew what to do with excess, but most everything came wrapped in its fibrous, dirty little self. And when we were fortunate enough to get a small ground animal, a rat, a bat, or a ferret, or whatever, or a fox, that was carefully distributed amongst the clan. And our average intake of animals wasn't our major source of energy. It was a luxury. And so over the course of time, our genome is developed from the great ape, and we are 98% George the gorilla. Now, George the gorilla, have you ever seen a fat gorilla? No, no. Even in the zoo, if you fed a gorilla the same way we feed ourselves, you get thrown in prison because that's inhumane to the animal.
Mm.
They get a diet of rich nuts, seeds, and fruits and fresh things to eat every day, lovingly hand cut up for them. All right. And if you've ever seen them feed the chimps or the gorillas at a zoo, it's like, oh my gosh, I'd eat that. And yet we don't. So this story is a huge story, but the basis of it is that me sitting here at my myself at 61 kilos or 138 pounds or whatever I am, uh, my average is, for me, for my height in this society, is 50 pounds heavier, or 25 kilos roughly heavier than I am sitting here from that experience with the average diet out there. Now, since I don't eat an average diet, and I don't have the excessive weight, I'm down 25 kilos, which is on the obese side. Let's talk about what obesity is. First off, me in the zone of the body mass index, which is 18 and a half to 25, I'm exactly in the middle at 21 and a half, just about. Okay. So I am neither skinny nor am I fat. Okay. And I'm not underweight, I'm not overweight. And if we look to the statistics, people that are between 20 BMI and 22 BMI have the longest lifespans in our society with the least amount of chronic degenerative disease. So it's a good place to be. That's the sweet spot inside the statistical norm, all right? But we are, when you get to 25 over here, you are over 25, you are overweight. And you get to 30 BMI and you are over 30, you are 30 and above, you are obese. You get to 35, you are morbidly obese. All right. And so these
So
areas,
you use as an example. So what did you say you weigh?
61 kilos roughly.
Okay, so if you were fat, you'd weigh 70 maybe?
No, if I was
If you were
me
25 BMI, you'd weigh roughly what?
probably about 72. Yeah, another 10
And then if
kilos,
you were obese, you would weigh 80?
80, 80, 82. Yeah.
And, and
Average
morbidly
person,
obese, you're getting up to 90 kilos.
yeah, the average person my height is in New Zealand and in Australia above 85 kilos.
Whoa.
A BMI of 29.5 is the average in New Zealand for all heights. I mean, not just mine. 20 and the Pacific Islander population is just a tad above 30. So Maori, Tongan, Fijian, Samoan. So it's like, okay, this is pretty serious. And that obesity is, again, it's not a cultural thing, it's a food thing. All right. And so we have that issue to talk about and say, well, how does one person get away from that? How do we say, well, what are the problems of obesity? Well, we talked about the inflammatory issues, but they first start in the arteries. You have this arterial inflammation, which is the beginning of lack of circulation to the body. You have this lack of circulation just on the blood compartment side of it, being a quote pro-cancerous factor. The cancer loves a low oxygen environment and it likes a high sugar environment. Right? So you have two things going on. Your blood sugar is generally higher, even though it's normal, until you get out to the third and fourth decade. And then finally you get into prediabetes or diabetes type 2, not adult onset, just type 2. It's happening in children so rapidly. We took away the adult title. So all of a sudden we see that this progression towards that is a disease promoting event. So heart disease, cancer, hypertension, these are the primary things that come on early in life in populations now. And we're seeing like a 40-fold increase in pancreatic cancer in the last 10 years. This is unprecedented. When I was a young doc, I read about pancreatic cancer. I never saw one. I had a patient once who had a relative that had it, and out of the literally thousands of patients I saw in my first 10 years of practice, I only really had offhanded secondary contact with it. Now seeing only hundreds of patients, not thousands, having a limited practice the last 10 years, I've seen 15, 18 patients in my own small spectrum that have had direct insult from that terrible condition. So these are unprecedented times. And of course, what goes right along between my first 10 years in practice and my practice right now is the rise in obesity. Okay. I can't recall greatly overweight patients my first 5 years in practice in Colorado and California. You know, maybe there were some postmenopausal women that were, 5, 10 kilos overweight that came in for some saying, I want to lose some weight, that was on their radar. But they weren't coming in 50, 80, 100 pounds overweight. All right. And that was it. That's the difference.
So you mentioned earlier about the way that the food industry has changed. Is that the only driving force here, or is it just the primary one?
Well, there's a lot of other factors too. One would be this, being able to spend a lot of sedentary time in front of our changes of occupations. Uh, when I think about when I was a kid, we were on a farm. It was hard labor. People moved all day and they slept soundly at night because they were wore out. And they ate at home because there was really no place to go, and you wouldn't eat out anyway unless maybe you know you just wouldn't. It wasn't as good as what you could get at home. You would never do that. So it was like a totally shifting culture. We've learned not to cook. We've learned not to exercise. We've learned to be distracted by multiple things from television to radio to our phones to all of these things that are looking for our attention in media, so to speak. And all of these are compounding the problem. If you're not,
Mm.
and that to me is like it's not just one thing. On top of that, you take that away from people. You get them out of the outdoors. You get them indoors. You isolate them socially. They're not having to go out and mix and work and problem solve with other people on how to get the bale of hay onto the back of the truck most efficiently. They're not doing that. And so there's an anxiety about being with people and around people and having to talk with people directly as opposed to texting them a half dozen words and making your point that way. So I think that there's a lot of factors that create a compounding of how our hormonal system, through increased anxieties, can further the body's ability to store calories and make us fatter yet. So you see how that kind of,
Mm.
it's like,
Yeah, I can see the complete build up, and as you said, it one thing builds on the next, which kind of has this logarithmic effect rather than just this straight line. So you can see why it's kind of exploded in the last, let's say, 30 to 50 years.
and I think logarithmic is the right term because it's exponential in its additive power here. It, I don't know how you can affect to give you would expect to give a drug and solve the problem as they're doing now, the gangbuster drugs that they're coming out with to for obesity. Um, it's
Well, the problem with that is always going to be, yes, I can stop either suppress your appetite or whatever, or help you shed the fat, but there's always going to be a side effect with anything external that we put into our body.
oh
And to a
yeah,
certain extent, you get a side effect from food, but you want a positive side effect from your food.
exactly. Yeah. And so the solution to the problem needs a rethink, it needs support, it needs education, it needs community, it needs continual reinforcement. It's hard, to, to be you don't go down to the butcher shop as a vegan and expect to find what you want to eat, what you want for dinner. And it's like that's similar to a lot of people who are asking to become plant-based because they've come down with a terrible condition, and that's a scientifically validated best diet for them to try to survive their condition, and yet they're going to the butcher shop, which is their own kitchen in the house where everybody else is eating insanely according to what we're doing. And so how do
Well,
we?
the big thing I've noticed around that is, so since I've gone plant-based, I watch, cooking shows, and it's like, Oh, we'll just put some salt in. Oh, we better put some oil in. And it kind of goes on. It's like 99% of what I see on TV, I can't eat anymore. Because it's usually got meat in it, but it's nearly always got dairy and salt and oil and all these other things. It's like, oh no, I don't think I'll eat that. You know, and
I
yet
have
you
a
can eat so beautifully.
yeah, I have a patient in an Alzheimer's study right now, and he's the patient's been doing this study for the last 10 years, where they do yearly CT scans and PET scans of the brain. And as this patient goes from the 70s to the 80s to the mid 80s in age, they're commenting on the increasing of the amyloid deposits, the shrinking of the brain, the shrinking of the hippocampus, which is related to memory and recall, and how, of course, what's that setting up is the aging brain and scenario of a doddering old person that can't remember their name and stumbling over their feet. Okay. But this person has also come from the massive, successful business community of the martini and the ribeye steak, for 4 decades of his previous life, and now embracing a bit more of the plant-based technology, a bit more of the exercise technology, a bit more of the mind-based stress reduction technology, and putting all these things together, despite having all the friends who want to go out and hit golf balls and drink martinis. Making his way through that has radically slowed the progression of these diseases, where he is functioning way above his peers. But my point is to saying, look, we can even do better than this. It's the hard parts to get from 85 to 90. If you make it to 80 to 85 is a milestone, but it's 3 times as hard to get to 90. Okay. Or maybe 10 times as hard, and have all your marbles. That's the point. You want to have all your marbles, so you don't want to
Yeah.
shrink the hippocampus. So, so all these lifestyle modification factors, and this person is not overweight. This person has always had a little bit of extra weight. And when we look at that, they're not in that 22, they're at that 24 and a half to 25 BMI, so right at that range. If they were at that 22, I think they'd reverse a lot of their symptoms, even demonstrable on their scans over a course of a year or two. And that's pretty cool stuff at 84, 85, 86 years of age to be able to reverse this stuff. Dr. Ornish just is publishing his results on Alzheimer's, doing meditation, counseling, plant-based diet, exercise in just a short study, and showing improvements. And of course, there's need for a longer study, but reversing some of the trends of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive impairment. So this is possible, but it all starts back here, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, when you're just a little overweight, then all of a sudden you're a little bit more overweight, then all of a sudden you're actually thinking to yourself, I'm fat, and what does that look like? Well, you have to buy a bigger belt, and you have to buy bigger clothes, and you're buying fitting shirts and big dresses and those types of things. And you're saying, well, I'm just doing the best I can. And yes, you are on the diet that you have, because the diet that you have is hypercaloric. It generally has less than 15 grams of fiber in it, because the fiber has been refined out to make it ultra processed. Because when you refine it out, you refine out that fiber, you can put it in a box and make it store for a long time. When you take a lot of the nutrients out of it, it doesn't rot in the box. Okay. How do you know a food is wholesome? Because if you let it sit on your shelf for 5 days, it's gone. It's either the rats ate it, or it's getting moldy. It's a real food. So we're out of that habit. When we eat
So
that,
you've just pointed to one of those myths around being overweight, that I'm overweight because I'm getting older. And it's that myth of just because I'm getting older, I'm going to get fatter. That's obviously not true.
that is absolutely not true. You think I'm getting older because my metabolism is slowing down. No.
That's another myth. have a
Yeah.
slow
Yeah.
metabolism. That's why I've got big bones. These are some of the things we say.
Yeah, I mean, there's a front row and there of the All Blacks, and there's the outside wingers, and they're different builds, but basically they're doing their job, and they're what we see is that big boned is definitely a different breed of animal, but it's not doesn't mean it's fat, all right?
Yeah, the All Blacks are big guys, but they're not necessarily fat and overweight. They might be
No.
very lean, big bodies.
Well, what we see is that, and here's how the science of 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 quote fat is really important to understand is that when you eat fat, what actually happens? Fat is rarely burned as energy when you eat it. Okay. Now, let's take, for example, a hamburger down at one of the burger joints. The hamburgers have been bred in the cows that they come from have been bred to have a hyper amount of marbling in their meat so that they have the most taste oriented profile that the burger company can get. And they actually add fat to the burger mix. And the average burger out there, I'm told, I haven't sampled one in a while, couple decades, I'm thinking. I haven't sampled one. Anyway, is
Wow.
60% fat. 60% fat.
Wow.
And about 30% protein, which what normal muscle is about 30% protein. So it's like, holy crap, Batman, this is not good. All right. But so people are eating that. They're having this, 1,000 calorie hamburger with all the fat sauce on it, with all the salty condiments on it, with all that. And maybe there's a pickle or a piece of lettuce in there. It constitutes about 1% of its caloric load, and they eat that, and the carbohydrates and the sugar that's in the ketchup and the other sauces in there bump the blood sugar up. And as the blood sugar goes up, the body says, let's turn up insulin to get this blood sugar down. And the insulin makes our body burn more energy. But it also makes us go, well, what if we can't get that energy into the cell because it doesn't need energy? What if we can't get that energy into the cell because um, the cell's already full of fat? And this is exactly what happens. The liver gets full of fat. The intra-abdominal body fat stores get full of fat. The muscles get full of fat. Then it goes on to the outside of the body, and it's just it goes over and over and over this cycle. And we start with our morning breakfast of let's say some toast, some jam, some yogurt, maybe a glass of juice, and right there in those three, four, we got 20 teaspoons of sugar and probably maybe 40, 30, 40% fat. Where'd it come from?
So what you're saying is also the myth is because I eat a lot of fat, I'm going to get fat. It's not just about the fat, it's the sugar and the oil and the salt and that combined impact of all of those things, or the low fiber as well.
Exactly. Remember, fiber is your time release mechanism. And like broccoli
Yeah.
has fat in it. Okay, less than 1%, but it
Does
has
it?
fat in it. Corn
Yeah.
has fat in it, but less than 1%. Even when you eat it off the corn on the cob, carrots have a couple percent. So everything has a natural amount of fat. Avocado, of course, like 35, 40% fat, because it's an oily type of thing. But what happens is that we, as an energy burning mechanism, we burn sugar. In our brain, 20% of our metabolism is burning glucose as a thing, okay? In our muscles, we burn fat. But how do we store this energy? Me, at my body size right now, I have about 2,000 calories of sugar stored in my body. Now, most of that's in my liver and in my muscles, okay? And it's stored in a very efficient form and called glycogen, which is kind of turns into a little crystal and it sits in there until you need it. And then they just pop off and do their job. So that allows me 2,000 calories of exercise or activity. It allows me to do quite a bit. But what happens when I run out of that? I have to start converting fat into energy. My body does that perfectly. Does it really great. But what happens if I'm eating 5 times a day and I've never run out of energy? Then I never burn the fat. All right. And that to me
which
is
is the argument
oh,
for fasting.
yeah, because remember, the average person in our society that weighs 29 to 30 BMI is eating 15 and a half hours a day. They never run out of food in their body. Their body never goes into ketosis at 4 o'clock in the morning where it says, I burn all my dinner and now I'm going to start burning some fat. Okay, and that fat's going to help the brain get rid of all that amyloid, right? All the detoxification mechanisms there. That fat's going to help the mitochondria regenerate the bone marrow and new stem cells. And so we're going to start protein metabolism bumping up again. And so by the time morning comes around and your cortisol levels start to rise and your eyes open up, you're refreshed, you're clean. But that never happens. If you're waking up sluggish, weepy, mopey, dopey, you got a hangover, and it's probably food. Okay. And so
That's an interesting term. So a food hangover, we know about the alcohol one, but you can have a food hangover.
yeah. Tell me your experience faster. How do you feel about day 3 of a fast? How are you sleepy, mopey, dopey?
No, that's when your energy's starting to pick up. And the clarity in the mind is there as well, is the beautiful thing. I get some of my best work done during a fast. I can't go for a long walk and do my work, but if I go, hey, because my mind's so sharp during the fast, I do my work. I get some of my best work done on day 3, day 4 of the fast.
Exactly. That's ketosis.
My body's working properly.
Working properly. We go in and out of it every day. And if you don't overfeed yourself and give yourself a food hangover, or you wrap all your food in fiber like it comes out of the ground and off the planet, you're fine. We're not saying meat's evil. We're just saying that we eat way too much of it in a process zone that shuts off all of our mechanisms and way too many calories of it. Average person in Australia and New Zealand eats about 400 grams of animal product a day, meat, cheese, eggs, dairy, fish. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of calories, so it's like where if you ate 400 grams of vegetables, how much does that, that's a bucket and a half of spinach. You can't do that. It's like it's a big plate. That's enough broccoli for 4 people. That's like it's a lot amount of fibrous food. But what happens is that we as humans eat about the same amount of food, regardless if we're eating crap or if we're eating the best whole foods diet. And it's by weight. All right. 2 to 3 kilos.
So this notion of calorie in, calorie out is not very accurate because that's what this whole story is about.
Yeah.
It's the type of calorie makes a huge difference, not just the quantity of it.
Right. And the further down the line we go, the harder it is for us to get back to normal metabolism. So when we realize that we do need our 2 to 3 kilos of food a day, and they happen to be burgers, fries, KFC, convenience food, juices, milkshakes, those types of things, we're getting huge amounts of calories, 3,000, 4,000 calories, somewhere in that range. And it's just getting, it's just bombarding the body, and we get something called insulin resistance because our insulin keeps going up and up and up to try to jam this stuff out of our circulation into our cells and store it. And yet the cells are plugged up, the receptor sites are plugged up, the lock and key mechanisms that normally open, they're gummed up and they're not working. And when that happens, of course, our body just keeps going up and up and up. I measure fasting insulin in all my patients, and I like to see a fasting insulin below 20. Now, normal is 10 to 80 on the normal scale, but I know if somebody's below 20, they've got great mechanisms working for them. I have people come in at 250. Yeah, they are so insulin resistant. And this is what we call metabolic syndrome. It's a metabolic disease in the process, and they will or are type 2 diabetics or pre-diabetic because they're still maintaining normal blood sugar. But it's an amazing thing that happens is that we have this cascade of degeneration. And the great thing is it's reversible. All you have to do is slow down the release of sugar, eat in a narrow window of time, like 12 hours. Maybe even push that into 13 hours of not eating, and your body will start to burn off what it's doing. And if you have that time release food and 12, 13 hours of not eating during daylight hours when your hormonal system says this is the time we're supposed to eat, great things happen. This is called time restricted feeding, time respected feeding, as I call it. And it's the number one dietary advice you can give somebody. And even with that, see your doctor when you change your diet, because if you're on insulin or metformin or things like that, your medication needs will change because you are more efficient. If you're on hypertensive medication, your medication needs will change because your blood pressure is going to drop when you start doing this. Why is that? Oh, I thought I was on that for life. No, you're not. You can turn that around. Oh, and by the way, in a couple months, you're going to have to go shopping because you're going to start losing weight too, probably in the order of a couple kilos a month to 3 or 4 kilos a month. When people radically change their diet, and if their underlying metabolism is strong enough, they'll start to sometimes 10 kilos a month when they have a significant weight problem without dieting, just by eating different foods at a different time. All right. So it's dramatic what people can be empowered to do, but they don't get this message from their doctor because their doctor's saying, look, there's a pill for this. They're not trained in physiology. Okay. I hate to say that, but
Which is kind of what's coming out of the conversations we've had, that cardiovascular, reversible, diabetes, reversible, obesity, reversible. I think that's an extraordinary possibility because most of us have been told that they're not, and it is for life. But I suppose it's no different. We created this situation, we can turn it back.
Yeah, I think I was telling you the story of walking into a shop the other day, and I don't know what I was doing in there, but I think I was just paying for some gasoline, some petrol, and in comes this mother and daughter, and they looked very much the same. They were both 30, 40 kilos overweight, and they bought their Coca-Cola out of the machine, and they had their muffin out of the other rack, and they're waiting to pay for their food. And I looked at them and I just went, oh, my heart just went, this is a correctable problem. And I felt like at that moment, I want to get a little card and I want to be able to give it to him. I say, I'm not judging. I want to help. This is all free. Just look at my website, go through this information and give it a try. Because you have I can see that there's issues here that are difficult, and nobody's probably ever told you that you can do something about it. And so I'm really thinking I'm going to get that card printed up and do this because everywhere you turn, you see these people. They just don't know any better and they don't know if they have any options. Nobody will talk to them until they have a panic attack, until they have met the criteria for bariatric surgery, until they, you know, it's an insane situation, and we have to take control of that now. This is what healthcare, real healthcare, should be about. And
Yeah.
yeah, excuse me.
So just one comment on that. We're even in that awkward situation of, if you actually gave someone the card, then they're just as likely to punch you in the face and tell you to stop fat shaming them. And it's kind of, I feel the same way that people, it's like, I feel the compassion for their situation and their struggle, but it's also, you need to call some of this stuff for what it is, that it's not in that acceptable, not from me as judging you're a good person, bad person, but acceptable from a health point of view of how can this person flourish? And that's what I get disappointed about, but you kind of can't, it's an awkward territory now.
I go back to Tony
So
Robbins
that's
here.
where we've got to. I think we've almost accepted that it's okay to be fat, and it is your choice. But really, do you really want that? Would that be your first choice in life?
Yeah, but you didn't choose it. You choose not to get out of it because you didn't know you could. And that's my point. And
Okay, I'm with you.
and that's why
Yeah.
I go back to Tony Robbins on this, and that you better have some pretty strong interpersonal skills when you confront people like this. Okay. Because you don't want to have a backfire on them, you know. And so that's
No.
why I
Yeah.
think that when you come from your heart and you come from compassion and you look somebody in the eye and you shake their hand and you say, look, I just want to help, and this is what I do and this is my experience, and uh, you can give it a try. That's all I'm saying. And
So
so
I hear three things: get help if you need it, plant-based diet, time restricted or time respected eating. Are they the top three?
you sure do. Oh, I'm joking here, but
Oh, Freud would have something to say about that.
yeah.
So
Uh,
anything else that's an easy part of what you do to, stay in that healthy weight range?
yeah, it's a lifelong commitment. This is not something you're not going to diet. You're going to change your lifestyle for life. And you're living for the new lifestyle. You are going forward in a pro-life method of living that is constantly uh, assessing your situation. I went to the pub last night with my Tuesday night bicycle gang. There was nothing on the menu for me to eat. All right. I
Yeah.
had my zero beer, and that there it was. I made the choice, but I knew that there wouldn't be, because I checked in advance that the place didn't have anything on the menu anyway. And so when I did that, I preloaded with some tortillas and beans here before I left.
Mhm.
So it was a good night. It was 15 of us. We rode the trails hard and had a great time. And and I was a little bit tired because I hadn't eaten in 6 days previously. I had a 6-day fast
Oh,
prior to the day before, and this was my first day back on food, so to speak. So I'd had a couple meals. I'd had probably 1,500 calories that day, and I did an hour and 45 minutes of riding up and downhill. It felt fine. There's no problem. My body could burn fat.
wow.
Okay.
How old are you again?
72 and a half. Start talking like a 4-year-old, 4.5.
Count the halves. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the message is that uh, weight distribution on the body has a lot of compounding factors, and just a little bit of walking around the block, uh, changing our ideas of what stresses we are under, changing how we eat, how we look at the property we live on. If we plant a little spinach or something out there to supplement our intake, and get the kids into that too. It's all it all mixes together, and there are metabolic reasons where people cannot lose weight, but they're not that common. They'd be less than a 3% of the population, I'm sure.
Mm.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think this has been a great all-round conversation because I think a lot of the conversation about weight is pretty black and white. You're eating the wrong food, that's it, get on with it. Whereas there's actually a whole bunch of factors coming together to make this a much bigger issue than it is. And I think also what you're saying is there's the double whammy here of being overweight has its own problems, but it's actually the internal inflammation that's kind of the side effect of being overweight that really grabs you and potentially causes the diseases down the track.
Yeah, and there are some cautions to this. If somebody's eating a standard diet devoid of, let's say that they've been, oh, I think I'm just going to go keto, and they've been just eating a lot of bacon and eggs and mashed potatoes and very little vegetables and fiber and eating more bread and things of that nature, and they go to this diet, they're going to have some problems. Okay, they could fold over like a clam because they're not used to that much fiber. So that's one thing. So be careful. Start slowly. Start with let's say a good breakfast of Patterson's porridge. Soak some oats overnight. Slice up a couple pieces of fruit. Throw a cup of half a cup of soy milk on top of it. Mix it up. Throw a handful of nuts on there, and just start with that for a couple weeks. That's going fine. All of a sudden, you realize, oh, I'm pooping regular now. Okay, this is good. The next thing the next thing you do is you say, well, what about lunch? And I said, well, lunch is a great time to do one of two things. You have a big chopped salad of some kind, or you have a hearty bowl of a vegetable soup and stew with potatoes and pumpkin and vegetables and things like that, all just cooked down, a can of beans in there or whatever, and have this big hearty soup, almost a stew. For lunch, and that's my wintertime go-to. Okay, in the summer, I often skip lunch and just have 3 or 4 pieces of fruit. But doesn't fruit raise your blood sugar? No, it's mostly water. Most fruit is 90-95% water. And the sugar amounts are slow, and they're also slow to release usually. All right. Won't be a problem. Good types of fiber in there too. And then for dinner, just a couple different types of cooked vegetables. This is where we want some grains in there, some rice, some buckwheat, some maybe a whole grain pasta, something of that nature. And all of a sudden, we have a little tomato sauce in there, and it's like dinner is easy. So all of a sudden, we got through an entire plant-based day without dessert, and we're full. And it's like, oh,
Mm.
if you're hungry after dinner, an hour or so, have a good cup of tea, and a big glass of water, you'll be fine, and you'll make it to the next day. And you'll wake up without a food hangover.
Yay.
You do that 5 days out of 7, you're going to find that you're losing weight. You're going to find that your energy is better. You're going to find that you're just getting ornery because you're going to want to go for a walk around the block or two because you've got the energy. You're going to want to take the dog for a walk. You're going to want to take your spouse for a walk and drag somebody along by the ear. You say, "Come on, we're going." You know, these are things that happen, and I think that people need to know they're empowered to do that. It is 97 times out of 100, it's not your fault that you're overweight. It's not your fault that you have these problems. It's been designed by industry to get you to buy more of their product. And the side effect is that you've had this issue happen. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the other side effect is it's the medical industry trying to solve this problem with the only tools they have, which is medication and procedures. And it's in lifestyle medicine, we realize that, oh, we've unraveled this. We're reversing type 2 diabetes. We're reversing cancer. We're putting these things into remission. Hypertension, autoimmune disorders, digestive disorders, they're all much easier to deal with when you have this lifestyle going along in the right direction and you're feeding the body the appropriate fuel. Is that something?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right.
Good work.
Well, Thanks, Jeff. I think that it's just the beginning of the conversation, and we don't need to go into my nerdy world of biochemistry and physiology and things of that nature.
We'll do
But
that next week.
just know if you don't, it doesn't have a barcode on it, it's probably a food. Okay. And to definitely visit your local Saturday and Sunday markets in the area, your farmers markets, those types of things where the fresh food is abounds, particularly down here, the Southern Hemisphere right now, where we're coming into spring and summer. We're starting to get lots of fresh food available. So yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Good work. Great to chat with you again. Look forward to having another chat next week.
I look forward to that too. And in the meantime, look after yourself. I know you do.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. Cheers for now.
See ya.
Bye bye.